Order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
Yes, it's that time of the week where we pause the action live from the House of Commons to explain what is going on. Tim Shipman from the Sunday Times joins me. How are you, Tim?
I'm very well indeed, Matt.
Are you excited by the prospect of Angela Rayner versus Boris Johnson?
It would be wrong at the top of a programme like this to say no to that question. It's potentially thrilling, isn't it?
The interesting thing about the sort of the Keir Starmer being testing positive Wednesday morning last week is we had the spectacle of Ed Miliband actually doing a pretty good job at PMQs. Then Rachel Reeves,
he's got a bit of form, hasn't he?
Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves doing a pretty good job responding to the budget. Were Angela Rayner to do a pretty good job today? Would that
Tongues might wag.
Tongues might wag. Would that make Keir Starmer squirm a little bit?
Yeah, or maybe think what a great thing it is that Labour have such a good and efficient top team. You know, any efficient Labour spin doctor will be able to spin this into a shadow cabinet of giants, ready to step in and take over the governance of the nation. At least that's what they should say.
It's lovely that you've been drinking so early in the day to come up with that sort of analysis. What do we expect Angela Rayner to go on? Because the Owen Paterson thing is extraordinary, but it's a bit complicated in quite Westminster Village.
It's a bit village, isn't it? I mean, you could go on the COP catastrophe and what's going on at the summit. It's probably not as bad as all that. I mean, you could go on COVID, which is beginning to be a problem again. People resigning from SAGE and saying, the government's not taking it seriously. If she wanted to be left field and show her sort of working class credentials, she might start to talk about immigration in a way that Keir Starmer is reluctant to do. I doubt she'll do that, but that would be an interesting turn of events. But, Paterson and the legitimate change to complicated and inefficient rules / massive sinister power grab would seem to be the obvious thing to do if you can, to use an old phrase, sex it up a bit and make it about wicked Tories and MPs judging their own homework and all that sort of thing.
It's sort of her wheelhouse, isn't it? She, the sort of Tory sleaze, crony, corruption.
It feels like natural terrain for Ange to swing her handbag.
Yeah, and possibly make Boris Johnson squirm a bit. Well, we're just keeping an eye on the House of Commons. A couple of backbench questions before Angela Rayner appears at the dispatch box. Lots of MPs have been told to wear masks after a bit of reluctance in previous weeks. There's some new rules being put in place. They're now cancelling all meetings and all banquets have been cancelled. New rules.
Good Lord, the end of days.
The end of days. No banquets in the House of Commons. New rules. They've got to be wearing masks, and it looks as if they are wearing them on both the Labour and the Conservative side. So I think we can now go live to the House of Commons. This is Labour's Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I share the opening words from the Prime Minister regarding our armed forces and the tremendous work they do, and also send my best wishes to all those recovering in Salisbury, and give our sincere thanks to the emergency services that responded on that day. And I'd also like to wish all those celebrating tomorrow a happy and peaceful Diwali. Now, let me start with something on which there should be agreement across all sides of the House. The independent standards process found that a member broke the rules on paid lobbying. Surely the Prime Minister accepts that this is and should be a serious offence.
Yet
we have seen reports that he will respond by scrapping the independent process and overturning its verdict. In no other profession in our country could someone be found guilty by an independent process and just have their mates vote them back into the job. Surely the Prime Minister and his government are not going to do that today.
No, Mr. Speaker, of course we're not going to do that, because paid lobbying, Mr. Speaker, paid advocacy in this House is wrong. And let me make absolutely no bones about that. And members who are found guilty of that should apologise and pay the necessary penalties, Mr. Speaker. But that is not the issue in this case or this vote that is before us today. It is not. The issue in this case, which involved a serious family tragedy, Mr. Speaker, is whether a member of this House had a fair opportunity to make representations in this case, or whether, as a matter of natural justice, our procedures in this House allow for proper appeal, Mr. Speaker. And that I think is something that should be of interest to members across this House, Mr. Speaker, and should be approached properly in a spirit of moderation and compassion, Mr. Speaker.
Angela Rayner.
OK, well, let's pause it there. She has decided to go on the Owen Paterson case. We should point out, which we didn't discuss before, Owen Paterson's wife took her own life last year. All of the lobbying actually applies to 2018, 2017, 2016. So there's a sizable gap in between. But like you were saying, one person's careful adjustment of the rules to ensure fair justice is someone else's dreadful marking of your own homework.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where a lot of people around the House understand that this system is far from perfect, that the rulings of the Commissioner are somewhat inconsistent. She seems to take umbrage against certain things and while nodding through others. There is clearly a personal element here which gives this extra sort of oomph from the Tory side. Owen Paterson's claim is that the investigation is what partly prompted his wife to take her own life. So it's quite heavily charged. But it's quite hard to escape the conclusion that rigging a committee so that the Conservatives can set the rules as they wish, and then potentially giving MPs more say over the outcome of these cases, that's pretty politically bad. And Boris Johnson would not be attempting it unless he had a majority of 80.
And I suppose the point is that the crime, if you like, isn't carrying out an investigation following his wife's sad death. It was lobbying on behalf of two companies who were paying him a lot of money. It's conflating the two things is slightly missing the point.
Yeah, I think the Tory argument is that the investigation could have been conducted better. Paterson could have had more opportunity to make his case. There were some witnesses that were not interviewed, and there have been examples of this in the past. If you go back to some of the situation around some of those vote leave cases before, there were claims that witnesses were not asked to give evidence who should have been. So it's a funny old situation, this. It obviously something the Tories feel strongly about, which is why they're prepared to put some political capital at risk to change it. But I think your average punter in the street is going to wonder what they're up to, really.
Well, let's go back and have question number 2 from Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker.
No, Mr. Speaker, of course we're not going to do that because...
on that day.
Oh, hang on. Let's rewind the machine.
Mr.
Here we
Speaker,
go, Angela Rayner.
Let me put this to him simply. If it was a police officer, a teacher, a doctor, we would expect the independent process to be followed and not changed after the verdict. Yeah. It's one rule for them and one rule for the rest of us. Mr. Speaker, when a Conservative member was found guilty of sexual harassment but let off on a loophole, they said the rules couldn't be changed after the event. So they can't change the rules to stop sexual harassment, but they can change the rules to allow cash for access. So why is the Prime Minister making it up as he goes along?
Just to jump in there, the other case that she's talking about there is Robert Roberts, who was an MP, who was a Conservative MP, readmitted to the Conservative Party, despite having been found to have sexually harassed a member of staff. And at that point, there was a row, wasn't there? And they said, well, we can't change the rules now because this is done and dusted.
Yeah, that's right. I think he has not been readmitted to the Tory whip, but has been readmitted to the membership of the party. But again, there's a lot of Tory MPs who look at that and think, why couldn't we just kick this bloke out? It would have been a lot cleaner and simpler.
But also, he's a relatively new MP, whereas Owen Paterson's been around for a long time. He's got lots of friends in the House of Commons who
that's right.
are perhaps, therefore, not the most impartial of judges on this. Let's hear Boris Johnson's reply.
Mr. Speaker, all the professions that she mentions have a right of appeal, Mr. Speaker. that is what the House needs to consider. And may I respectfully say to her that I believe that she needs to focus, instead of playing politics on this issue, which is what they are doing. I think that she needs to consider the procedures of this House in a spirit of fairness, Mr. Speaker. And we on this side of the House, instead of playing politics, we are getting on with delivering on the people's priorities, Mr. Speaker. 40 more hospitals, 20,000 more police officers, wages up, growth up, and jobs up across this country. Those are our priorities.
Order. Order. Mr. Perkins, I don't want to say any more of that either. Right. Angela.
Right. Lindsay Hoyle slightly losing. I love the idea of, can we stop playing politics? Wages are up, growth's up.
Yes.
Here's some election
Let's
slogans.
not play politics, but
Politicians
here's what you'll be reading
just the worst.
on the side of a bus near you at the next general election. I thought that would be both the question and the answer were pretty good, sort of rollout of what both parties think are their biggest selling points. Rayner hit quite effectively that, one rule for them and one rule for the rest of us, which is a common theme now when Labour are effectively attacking this government and accusing the Prime Minister himself as making it up as he goes along, which is something I think that does cut through as well. And then Boris Johnson replied with, well, what really matters here? It's your schools, your hospitals, your job, and we're doing all right on that front. Thank you very much. And that's the next general election in a nutshell, isn't it?
I suppose the thing that part of the reason why the Labour Party keep niggling away at this one rule for one for the other is that the Dominic Cummings affair was probably the worst point for the government in terms of their sort of political view, the view that voters had of them. So constantly trying to reignite that, get that old bandwagon rolling is a priority.
I think that's right, but I think conversely, a lot of Tory MPs think, well, yes, what Boris Johnson said is right. The big things that matter are your job and the economy and the health service. Why are we wasting political capital trying to redo the sleaze rules?
Just say, terribly sorry, Owen, but you've got to suck it up.
Yeah, I've spoken to people this morning who say, their whips have been calling them, telling them they've got to vote the way, and those MPs pointing out that this is a matter for the House of Commons, and people saying they're going to abstain and ignore what the whips are telling them because they don't want to get involved in all this.
All right, let's go back. Question number 3 is Angela Rayner stands here for Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, this isn't about playing politics in this place. This is about playing by the rules. And as we can see, it's one rule for everybody else and one rule for the Tory Conservatives. When they break the rules, Mr. Speaker, they just remake the rules. Yeah. And I know that Donald Trump is the Prime Minister's hero, but I say to the Prime Minister, Prime Minister, in all seriousness, he should learn the lesson
shaking her head,
that if
Boris
he keeps
Johnson not
cheating
happy.
the public, it catches up with you in the end. Yeah. Because while they're wallowing in sleaze, the rest of the country faces higher bills, rising costs and damaging tax rises. So I ask the Prime Minister, can you tell us what is the projected tax increase per household over the next 5 years?
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell her is that what the recent budget did was take cash from those who can afford to pay the most, and it had very substantial tax cuts for the hardest working and poorest families in this country. We cut £1,000, Mr. Speaker, with the universal credit taper relief cut for hard-working families in this country. 2 million families had a £1,000 tax cut, and we're lifting the living wage across the whole country, Mr. Speaker. And what we are also doing, Mr. Speaker, is ensuring that this country gets on with a high-wage, high-skill, jobs-led recovery. And never let it be forgotten that if we listened to them, we would have none of those things, Mr. Speaker, because we'd still be in lockdown.
Right, we've slightly moved on now, onto possibly firmer ground for Boris Johnson. The Labour Party think they've got, a good attack line against the Conservative because of the economy and tax and so on, but it does give Boris Johnson a chance to just do his greatest hits. Tim Shipman.
Yeah, that's right. Rayner had a good line. You break the rules and you remake the rules. That is perhaps a bit too clever by half to be a hit later, but she's doing all right. But as you say, Boris Johnson will be sort of relieved that bit's over, and he can now just hit his election slogans all the time for the rest of this thing, I would have thought. It's interesting, though. He is persisting with this line that changing benefits is a tax cut, which had Rishi Sunak feeling the heat the other day at the Select Committee, where people were claiming this is nothing to do with taxes. It's a change to benefits. But the Tories are, rolling out a taper rate on benefits as a tax cut, which, in a sense,
the government is going to take less of your income away.
Correct.
But it's a bit of a
reach,
more complicated.
isn't it? Yeah.
Right, let's go back. Question number 4. This is
I
Angela
think he
Rayner.
missed out the number, so let me help him out. The Resolution Foundation found that by 2026, taxes will be £3,000 more per household since he took office. My constituents and his constituents are feeling the pinch, and they're worried about Christmas as well, Mr. Speaker. Their bills are going up every week, and the budget did nothing to help them. So can the Prime Minister tell them how much was the tax cut that he gave to the banks instead?
Mr. Speaker, as she knows very well, it is the banks and the bankers who are paying far more proportionally as a result of our tax measures to cover the cost of the NHS. And actually, it's a very moot point, because the £36 billion came from 50% of it comes from the 14% who are the richest in this country, Mr. Speaker, overwhelmingly from the banks and financial services industry who can pay the most. And the astonishing thing, Mr. Speaker, is when it came to voting for that £36 billion increase in 48 new hospitals, in 50,000 more nurses, in looking after our public services, they voted against it, Mr. Speaker.
Angela Rayner.
It feels a bit like after a good start, we're losing
Feels
a
like
head
this
of
is
steam.
one of those PMQs again, isn't it now? There's interesting things here. The Resolution Foundation that Labour is quoting is run, of course, by Torsten Bell, who used to be a Treasury advisor to the Labour Party, so there's a nice bit of linkage there. Boris Johnson continuing what he did as London Mayor, defending banks and bankers in a way that no other Tory politician ever has, which I always find interesting. But, you've then got a philosophical difference. Labour think they throw around banks and bankers and everybody recoils in horror. And Boris Johnson says, well, these people raise lots of money, lots of tax, and it's them who are giving us the money to spend on this stuff. And that's, the essence of Labour versus Tory politics.
There's also a sort of the complete inversion of politics. You've got the Labour Party complaining about taxes going up to fund public services.
Yep.
And the Tories attacking Labour for not supporting increases in public spending.
Yeah, and this is what Boris Johnson has managed to do. For right or wrong, whether it will work or not, we don't know in the long run. But he's changed the dynamic. He's changed the political discourse, and he's changed the political map in this country. And Labour need to find ways of having a pop at him that they're not used to. Rayner's making a pretty decent fist of it, I would say. But, one feels like the greased pig is beginning to slip loose from the from its moorings now and is beginning to run happily around the farmyard.
I'm not quite sure, but having had that conversation earlier on about what's happening to pigs, maybe we shouldn't get too bogged down in that. Right, let's go question number 5. This is Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, according to the Prime Minister's own budget documents, it was £4 billion in tax cuts to the bankers and £3,000 of tax rises per household. Good news for the donors who gave his party £500,000. His bank got a bonus of nearly £8 million, but not so good news for the rest of us, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, this month, as the Prime Minister said, we remember and celebrate all those who serve our great country and all those who have lost their lives, leaving behind loved ones, and those who have sustained life-changing injuries and live every day with the consequences of their sacrifice. Yet hidden in the small print of the budget was a £1 billion cut to day-to-day defence spending. Shocking. So, Mr. Speaker, will our servicemen and women face pay cuts, or will there be fewer of them with less support?
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's quite incredible that we're now hearing this from the Labour Party when they would have pulled us out of NATO and I think the right honourable lady actually wanted to abolish the army. What you've got, she wanted to abolish the army. The woman sitting next to her, Mr. Speaker. What you've got in this government is a spending on defence, which is the highest since the Cold War, the biggest uplift since the Cold War, and an increase that has restored confidence in this country around the world in our ability to defend not just our own shores, but to defend our friends and partners as well. And that is what this government is doing.
Angela.
Right, it's interesting. There's more interesting politics going on here. Angela Rayner now positioning herself and the Labour Party as the friends of the military.
Yeah, no, I got it wrong at the top when I said she might try immigration, but she's gone with defence instead, and this is an interesting moment.
Yeah, all plays
doing something slightly counterintuitive, showing the working class families who've abandoned Labour that they are about, nation and defence as well as about, helping the poor, and I think that's interesting. Boris Johnson can rightly claim that he's chucked loads of money at sort of headline schemes for the MOD, but their day-to-day budget is a shambles, and there's a lot of money needs being clawed back there. There's been a huge amount of waste and overspending, and not surprised that the Treasury is grabbing a little bit of that back under the table. So, a good bit of research from Labour there, and interesting that Rayner has mixed things up. It's the third different theme in her 6 questions, and she's keeping him on his toes.
And we should point out the allegation of wanting to scrap the army, and the woman sitting next to you, that was Lisa Nandy, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, sitting next to Angela Rayner on the Labour's front bench. I think she spoke at the launch of a pamphlet which talked about possibly scrapping the army, replacing it with something else. But she insisted that she didn't applaud the report, and it's complete and utter rubbish, she said. She's always stood up.
It was Jeremy Corbyn who famously mused that couldn't we do away with all this in the same way that some of these peace-loving South American nations don't bother with armed forces. But yes.
But it's interesting, and Angela Rayner, one of the great survivors of the front bench under Jeremy Corbyn, now putting a flag
in the ground,
if you will, to extend your military metaphors. Right, I think we've reached question number 6 now. Let's see if Angela, she's covered a lot of ground. Owen Paterson, tax and spending, benefits, and now the defence budget. Where will she go with question number 6?
Mr. Speaker, he knows that I asked him about the annual defence budget, which his own budget documents show will drop by £1.3 billion. Yep. And I hear the Prime Minister's fine words. I'm from a military family myself, but I won't take party political lectures from him because too often the government's actions don't match their words. And Mr. Speaker, I think of my constituent who fought in Afghanistan and yet was threatened with sanctions because he was unable to physically travel miles to the nearest DWP office. Shameful. The Prime Minister's tax cut for short-haul flights last week cost £30 million. That is 50% more than the government spends on supporting veterans' mental health each year. The charity Combat Stress has lost £6 million in funding this year, even as their calls to their helpline have doubled. So will the Prime Minister match our proposal to reinvest the £35 million saved from cancelled MOD contracts to support our veterans that surely deserve it?
Mr. Speaker, it's because we've been able to run a strong economy and take our economy out of lockdown that we've been able to invest massively in the NHS. We've been able to lift spending on defence to record levels and to keep supporting our fantastic public services. That is what this government is able to do, Mr. Speaker. And I must say I enjoy my conversations with her in spite of the insults that the party political points that she directs it towards us, Mr. Speaker. And I may say, I don't want to cause any further dissension in the benches opposite, but I think you all agree she has about a gigawatt more energy, Mr. Speaker, than the right honourable gentleman, her friend from Holborn and St. Pack. I'm just putting it out there, but it's the same old Labour. No plan, no ideas. We're getting on, Mr. Speaker, with delivering on the people's priorities. We're taking this country forward. Growth up, jobs up, wages up, productivity up. All they do, Mr. Speaker, is play politics while we deliver.
Jake Brereton.
You got the slight sense there, Boris Johnson wasn't quite sure how to finish.
Well, I mean, he finished question 6 as I think he finished question, was it 2 or 3?
2 and possibly 3.
Yes. You know, well, when you've got your lines, you should probably stick to them.
And
but a little jibe there,
a tiny little jibe there,
yes,
saying that
a gigawatt more energy.
Angela Rayner's got a gigawatt more energy than Keir Starmer, which
Captain-
is true. I mean,
Yes.
let's not overblow it. That PMQs isn't the be all and end all and all of that. However, I mean, you know, William Hague was the only thing that he was particularly successful at as Tory leader. But, you know, he says that had he been less successful than that, it would have been even worse. And keeping the troops buoyed up and showing a bit of muscle and a bit of, you know, having something about you is what you need. And actually, we've seen in the last week, Angela Rayner, Ed Miliband, Rachel Reeves socking it to the government a bit more than Keir Starmer normally manages.
Yeah, I think that's right. I was quite impressed, actually. I thought she was... she kept him, you know, he wasn't able to get into his... You thought halfway through he was about to get into his comfort zone. And the fact that he deployed the same answer twice sort of makes you think that, you know, he might well have had to deploy it 5 times if it had been a more pedestrian one. Interesting. And, you know, I'm from a military family myself, says Angela Rayner. For those of you that didn't know, you know, everyone knows she was a granny at 31 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But you know, that gives a little bit more to the Rayner biography too.
And in terms of the things that land, we were talking yesterday we were doing the focus group, and Boris Johnson's sort of colourful turns of phrase do land. People, you know, they get reflected back all the time. We were struggling to think of anything that Keir Starmer made, you know, and actually, you know, it would take a while, but some of that sort of, what was it, wallowing in sleaze. Too often the government's actions don't match their words. It's one rule for one for all of that. Is just trying to get to a thing that are the sort of messages that come up in focus groups and that sort of stuff.
Exactly. I mean, you know, we've been hearing the sort of one rule, as you say, since the Cummings affair. You know, one rule for them. One rule for the rest of us, and that is a bruise they need to keep punching. Thus far, the government is giving them fresh opportunities.
Well, there we are. That probably brings us to the end of PMQs Unpacked. Lynn's been in touch saying, all I've noticed is the quiet while Rayner speaks and the awful bedlam when Boris speaks. Where is the speaker? I think actually quite a lot of the bedlam when Boris Johnson was speaking was coming from his own side, wasn't it? Sort of trying to buoy him up.
Yeah, I think that's... I remember someone during the general election campaign referring to Boris Johnson as a confidence player. He's good when he thinks he's good, and when he wallows in self-doubt, he gets a bit cautious. So yeah, they like to sort of make it sound like he's at a football game and has just
it's a bit lively. It's a bit lively.